Welcome to another episode of the Viva Virtuoso live podcast. Warren Peterson, your host here, and we have an extraordinary guest for you to talk, for us to talk to and learn a lot about today. She has navigated through all genres of music and has just a pot brimming full and grew up in the cauldron of culture and music and probably a lot of things we don't even know about, but we hope to learn about those. I won't wait any longer to introduce the lovely Sandra Booker.
Thank you so much for having me on the program. It's really nice to be here.
Well, it's lovely to have you here. And among other things, Sandra is a singer, and a songwriter and arranger, and we will spend a lot of time today talking about that and her life. I sort of teased at it, but you did grow up in the cauldron, certainly of culture, music, arts, society, just a crazy blend of inspirations for you, and that was the city of New Orleans. And I'm just hoping you can tell us a little bit and unwind as much as you want about what it was like growing up in that environment as a child.
It was great. It was wonderful. It was magical. New Orleans is, it's one of the most beautiful places in the world to me. I think it's one of the reasons I have a great affinity for the city of Paris, because New Orleans is the baby Paris of America, I guess. But it's a very culturally rich city. The people are so deeply rooted there. The Creole community, the Cajun community, the music is everywhere. I mean, there's music in the language. There's music in how we prepare food, the cuisine of New Orleans. There's music in the second line and how we celebrate life and how we address death in the city as part of the culture of the city. So it was wonderful growing up in New Orleans. I can't imagine growing up anywhere else, even though I have lived in different parts of the world at various times of my life. I wouldn't trade being born in the city that gave the world jazz for any other city in the world.
And it is that city. And you not only grew up in that kind of a city, but you also grew up in a home that was maybe amplified all of those effects as well. And can you tell me a little bit about family life and how you were led into singing?
Absolutely. I am one of 8 siblings. My parents, Johnny and Evzelda Booker. My father is deceased, but my mother's still alive. Yay. And tomorrow is actually my father's birthday, so it's a special weekend for me in that regard. But I was the 6th of 8 children. We were all exposed to the arts. We were all exposed to music and literature and dance and every type of music you could imagine. I mean, I listened to as much hee-haw as a kid as I listened to the Soul Train music. So nothing was off limits, but I had a particular love because of my maternal grandmother, who absolutely loved the symphony, loved the opera. And I spent a lot of afternoons with her, particularly the weekends, listening to the Boston Pops on PBS. I was a PBS kid from early on as well, and just want to give public television its due. It was very influential, and she took me to various concerts at a very young age. I spent a lot of time going to different churches throughout New Orleans. One, Greater St. Stephen's Baptist Church, had this magnificent choir, and my parents loved the Mississippi Mass Choir, and music was everywhere in New Orleans. So you could either go to St. Louis Cathedral and hear the Latin Mass, or you could go out to the New Orleans East and hear some small little shotgun church, such as Infant Jesus of Prague Spiritualist Church, which we belonged to for a while. And so I just, music was like language. Music was like food. It was just a part of the upbringing. And you knew somebody that played an instrument or sang or danced or something. So it was wonderful growing up in that environment. And I just fell in love with singing because I thought my mother was the greatest singer I had ever heard. And so I actually spent a lot of time mimicking her. That's where the love for singing came from. Her voice was angelic to me, raw, untrained. so authentic, and the way that she could turn a phrase in a song, or the way she could, use her vibrato to make the tail of a phrase short or long or wobbly. It was just, I mean, she just had this innate knowledge of the voice. And so my love of voice really came out of emulating, or trying to emulate, my mother.
Now, in the short time I've known you, I've learned that you're quite a perseverer, and I'm interested in what may have been your growing up circumstances, where those values and that tude, I guess I'll call it, that you are always going to move ahead despite whatever the circumstances are. How early was that instilled in you?
Very early. I had the most fearless grandmother, Maddie Pendleton Pryor Johnson. I love you wherever you are, my dear. It really came from my grandmother. My mother worked when I was very young. And so I spent a lot of those formative years with my grandmother. And she was the person who was in the home. She lived with our family. And so she was the person that babysat me. She was the person that taught me table manners. She was the person that taught me the Bible. She was the person that taught me about music and food and poetry. And, she was a wonderful, such an imaginative storyteller. So I really took all of those things from her. And I think that formed me into the person that I wanted to be. She was somebody that I had a great deal of respect for. The truth was very important to her. And having your word and having your word be your bond, those were the things she didn't say. Those were the things she lived by. So her example was so impactful on me as a young person. And I tried to live up to those values, never really an expectation. My grandmother was always about, be who you want to be. Be who you want to be, but know what you want to be. And don't let other people decide what your truth is. That was instilled in me very young. And she said the four most powerful words to me that I'll take to my grave: the free don't whisper. The free don't
whisper. Those are strong. Those are very strong words. I'll let them ring for a second. So is there anything, and this is probably a tough thing to describe, but are there New Orleans values? Are there values that as a city and as a people, you kind of will find all around town, no matter who you talk to?
Absolutely. We are relentless people. We are people who are resilient, and we are strong. We believe in community. We believe in family. Even when those bonds get strained, they have a way of reconnecting themselves. I am still best friends with a woman named Katanya Berger Gagne. I've been her best friend since I was 5 years old, and I'm quite a bit older than that now. But the bonds that I think people build in that city, this is a city that's often finds itself facing, inclement weather. This is a city that's had its fair, and perhaps more than its fair share, of violence. It has a violent history, but the people have a way of coming together around the things that are important to us, the things like art and music and dance and parades and Mardi Gras and jazz and the mint julep and the hurricane beverage and crawfish and beignets and the Café du Monde. So all of that, I think, because it's been so steeped in tradition, those traditions become very important, and keeping them alive becomes very important. And that's where that perseverance comes from. It's maintaining those traditions so that they're there for future generations.
And for those of us who probably have more of a tourist-centered view of your wonderful city, and think of Bourbon Street, Mardi Gras, crawfish, Preservation Hall, and funeral dirges, what would probably be the most surprising thing about the city?
The beauty of the city. Of course, we know that Hurricane Katrina was quite devastating to New Orleans, and my family was directly impacted by it. But I think it's the loveliness of the city. New Orleans at twilight time is very beautiful, being uptown, but also the old neighborhoods of the lower Ninth Ward, the upper Ninth Ward, the Eighth Ward where I grew up, the Treme area. They still have their beauty. They still have their elegance. There's just an elegance, even in its most rustic form, that I find so beautiful about New Orleans. The sound of the city when the ringing of the bells at the St. Louis Cathedral can be heard in the evening for Vespers, or the sound of a tambourine or a clarinet being played on in Jackson Square. I love the sound of the trolley car going up the St. Charles Avenue. So there's so many things, or just sometimes the wind in the trees of the magnolias and the way they shimmer, or the rippling of the Mississippi River or the waves of Lake Pontchartrain. So there's so many things about New Orleans that I think makes it unique and special. And there's so much more to the city than just being on Bourbon Street. I tell people, go to the Cabildo, go visit Uptown, go visit New Orleans East. Take a drive just around the city. It's not that large of a city, but to know the city, walk down Frenchman Street, see what's, by the River Walk. It's a beautiful place, and it has such a rich history. Go visit the Ursuline Orphanage. There's a lot to do there, and read about the city, read about the culture of the city, read about the history of the city. I've spent quite a bit of time doing that just so I know my background, my history, what's there and what's no longer there.
And thank you for describing that. And the reason why I probably spent a little bit of extra time on it was I want our audience to have a full appreciation for the vast array of inspirations that they may not have been aware of that were formative for you and really part of your musical development. So when we do talk about your projects and your musical development, they have a sense of the just full spectrum, 360-degree experience of inspiration that you had going on there that probably people don't fully appreciate when they hear about an artist from New Orleans. So having said, please go ahead.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Most people assume that, if you're from New Orleans, then you grew up with church music. That was your first introduction to music. And in my case, that's actually not true. My first real introduction to music was listening to my mother sing opera, listening to operatic programs, and listening to the Latin Mass. That's really what caught my attention first. But there was no music that was off limits in our home. Some people grew up where, you can only listen to this kind of music. My parents allowed us to have access to everything. So
now, was there a favorite roster of artists that you would hear?
We listened to everything from Professor Longhair and the Neville Brothers and Lakeside to, Renata Tebaldi. Jessie Norman, of course, was God, and it was a goddess in our home. And even Kathleen Battle, Montserrat Caballé, of course, the Queen, Maria Callas. We listened to Sarah Vaughan, who was one of my favorite singers, Elis Regina. There was Brazilian music, there was calypso music in the house, there was everything. So you were exposed to everything, and from that you start to draw. I listened to Natalie Cole, but I also listened to Tina Marie. I listened to Al Jarreau, but I also love Gino Vanelli and Michael Franks. So that Casey and the Sunshine Band as much as Earth, Wind and Fire. So we didn't have those things that said you can only listen to this. We were exposed to everything, and I felt very fortunate, especially as I started to get older, and how much I had been exposed to, the music of Norman Connors, the music of Roy Ayers, the music of Main Ingredient, the music of Enchantment, Stevie Wonder, but also the music of Gene Carn, the music of Minnie Riperton, those voices, Betty Wright, so many great singers that I got to hear and really loved their music and knew their music, felt that I knew their music intimately. Millie Jackson was just like, oh, Millie Jackson. So I got to hear the blues of Jermaine Basil and Irma Thomas and Ernestine Anderson, but I also got to hear the jazz of Ella Fitzgerald and Betty Carter and people like that.
Well, I think our audience is going to have a lot of research to do based on the number of influences. You have a veritable, just a treasure trove playlist in the making with the names that you mentioned. And somewhere in the middle of there, you mentioned a name, and you just struck me with a story that we told as we got to know each other, that you told to me. And there was a moment of an aha moment when you discovered that there was another singer that was copying you and sounded just like you. Could you tell us about that? Because I think it's kind of important in your musical development.
So as a kid, I was such a ham, and I loved to put on performances for my family. You know, that's what we did, especially during hurricanes. Like whenever there was a hurricane, you already knew that the power was probably going to go out. And so we kids would put on shows, and, you know, I had my invisible top hat going. But when I became a student at the New Orleans Center for the Creative Arts, which is now the NOCA Institute, I was really, you know, there was no jazz voice. So I never took jazz voice lessons like, you know, some singers now have the benefit of having, you know, a jazz vocal curriculum. I never had that. It was classical from the get-go. But I started getting into jazz records because the school did have a jazz program for instrumentalists. And I thought, how awesome, but how unfair, because if the instrumentalist can, I wanted to do that too. But there wasn't anything for that. So it was just classical voice. And I started looking for singers that I should check out and get to know. And a teacher at Warren Easton, which was my high school, gave me a Sarah Vaughan record. Now, Sarah Vaughan records were already in my house. That wasn't new. But this particular record had Misty on it. And I, you know, went and found other records that were in my parents' collection that also had Sarah Vaughan, and there was a recording of Misty. But, you know, it was special that this teacher had given it to me. Long story short, I started listening to this record and fell in love with it. And one day my mother and she just happened to be in the room, and we were listening to the records. And I said to my mother, I said, you know, Mom, I really like this singer. Well, my mother was like, Dinah Washington or nothing. And so we became Team Washington versus Team Vaughan. And I said, well, let me tell you what I really love about this singer. She sings like me. And my mother burst into the most wonderful, slightly derisive laughter, because she really got a kick out of the idea that this kid thinks Sarah Vaughan sings like her, when it's so probably the other way around. But it was that operatic element she had to her voice that reminded me of my operatic training and how I blended those sounds together in my music. So it was my only point of reference. You know, I didn't think of it as, wow, you know, I sound like Sarah Vaughan. Oh, Sarah Vaughan kind of sings like me. And I would later get the nickname Lil Sass from the great Andy Simpkins, which I thought was one of the greatest compliments I'd ever received in my life. Because as I got to know about her work, I just thought,
well, yeah. Simply divine, right?
Simply divine, the divine one.
So that this will be milestone marker 1 to check out Sandra's YouTube channel, because you will see that she has performed in the tradition of Sarah Vaughan. She's done lots of great American songbook. She's performed internationally in this arena. I think you even have a Sarah Vaughan tribute, although there's plenty of music out there that Sarah would have performed in which you have your own voice. So could you tell us right now what listeners that go over there, how they get there, and what they might be interested in listening to? What's your kind of pick list for them?
Well, I actually did a show called Forever Sassy, the divine music of Sarah Vaughan. And I think I did this in 2018. And I put together this program of her music. Sarah Vaughan, unfortunately, passed away of cancer as well, lung cancer. And when I was diagnosed, I just really had that sort of, unfortunate connection to her then as well. But I loved her music, and I wanted to do something to pay tribute to her and her strength, to pay tribute to the great artist she was, and in my opinion, remains. and to do something for a program I started called Jazz Musicians Against Cancer. And it's a GoFundMe campaign that when I started it was to do a couple of things. Number one, to raise awareness about the importance of screening for cancer. Number two, the importance of having art in your life when you're fighting for your life. And number three, a way for me personally to continue to work, to be able to produce concerts that allowed me just to continue to work, because for me, the music was my medicine. And I actually did a 2017 tour of Europe where that was the title of the tour, the MIM tour, Music is Medicine tour. And it was wonderful. We sold out all of the shows. We did everything from, full concert halls to little bitty cafes, but we were able to raise, I think about almost $15,000 over the course of that period. And it allowed me to continue to work as an artist while encouraging other people not to give up their art because they may be facing a dreary diagnosis of any kind. The importance of art in life, I think, is what makes life beautiful, and it makes it buoyant, and it makes it important. And I wanted to be an example of that. Sharon Jones, who was with Sharon Jones and the Dap Kings, also passed away of cancer. But the way she chose to live her life while having that battle was very, very inspirational to me. And that was what I based my decision on, to do the same thing, do something similar, was to just keep working.
Well, and sometimes that's the best form of therapy. And if you're a musician, there's nothing like music to keep the spirit buoyant and moving ahead. And what's tragic is when musicians shut down. And but you're clearly not that kind of person. And I hadn't maybe intended of asking this question just yet, though I did intend on asking you. But I've seen in places that your motto is "Life Awesome."
Life awesome.
What since we're on the topic, what does that mean? What does that mean to you?
It means simply that life is awesome. To be alive is a gift. You've already outswam 2.9 million of your closest relatives. Life is a gift. It's something very precious, and I think far too often we take it for granted. Far too often we take the position, there's always tomorrow, and there is always tomorrow, but there's not going to always be a tomorrow for you. And I would like to see the world be kinder and sweeter and softer and more inclusive and just better. And I try to encourage people to see life as an awesome, powerful, wonderful, magical thing with an expiration date.
And it seems that you're energized now, especially to push that message out to the world. And there is I promise you, we'll leave links to all your wonderful work that you've done with the Great American Songbook. And I mean, it's just a beautiful body of work that you have out there on your YouTube channel. But I want to make sure we give due justice and time to that life awesome message that you are pushing out now. And you have a wonderful new project, but it's based upon a wonderfully old idea. And when actually prior to our first meeting, I listened to a preview, I think, of a work you were singing, and then we got to talking a little bit and got more of a flavor for it. And my first reaction to it was, boy, this is the one of the finest songs that never got performed or never got played. And I think I shared that with you, and it's an incredible experience. And but rather than talk about my reaction about that now, you have a story to tell, and I know it's just fresh out for people to listen to. So hopefully that story is fresh enough in your head that you can talk about the genesis of this single, the process that got you to recording, and all the way up to its release. And I'll reel out the line and you just go for it.
I wrote this song actually in 2009, and the song was inspired, sadly, due to the loss of a very good friend, someone I thought of as a brother, Dr. Derek Finch. And when I found out that he had passed, I couldn't do anything but write this love letter to my friend, with the full understanding, I'm not going to see you again in this life, but maybe there's someplace else we'll meet up. And the only thing that kept coming to me was the relationship that I had with him. And it's difficult. It took me 10 years to be able to record and sing this song without crying, and I still get misty. Because the relationship that I had with him was based on so much love and so much respect. He was such a beautiful human being. And the relationship was based on truth and saying what we really felt. We didn't have to edit each other. We didn't have to censor each other. And that was so liberating. And there was a freedom in the relationship because there was no fear in the relationship. So when I lost him, I knew the magnitude of what I had lost. I shall never meet his equal. And I wrote this love letter to remember my friend and to hopefully inspire other people. Do not take love for granted. Don't take love for granted. Don't take life for granted. It never crossed my mind. I'm so sorry. I've got tears running down my face, but it is what it is because I'm going to keep it 100. It never crossed my mind that there would be a time I wouldn't see my friend again. And when I wrote this song, I tried to perform it at a memorial service that was being held at the University of Southern California, where he received his doctorate posthumously. And I couldn't do it. And then I tried it a year later and I couldn't do it. But last year when COVID struck, COVID had a profound impact on my life because I lost a lot of people within the span of a year. And I lost people who were battling cancer to COVID. And that was just even more devastating. And this song started to get under my skin. It started to get in my ear. I just kept hearing it over and over and over again. And because I was moving away from the jazz community and you know, I've done the Great American Songbook. I don't feel like I fit into this community. I don't feel like the community was welcoming to me anymore. Just, you know, things changed for whatever the reason. I wanted to do music, but I didn't want to do jazz music or what is considered, you know, traditional jazz music. You know, I was having my Miles Davis moment and moving forward, but this song kept at me. A young man named Robert Turner, who is a brilliant pianist and up-and-coming young producer, reached out to me about doing a funk recording of A Night in Tunisia. Well, I recorded A Night in Tunisia on my debut record very early. The arrangement was just super fat and super fly, but it didn't speak to me because I'd already done that recording. So I said, well, thank you, but I think I'm going to pass on that. So he said, look, is there something else you might be interested in doing? And I said, I'm interested in doing my music. I've sang a lot of other people's music, and there's nothing wrong with that. And there are some really magnificent singers out there who are still singing the Great American Songbook, and they're going to be singing it. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's a great repertoire of music, but it just didn't speak to me because of what's going on in society, the social injustice, police brutality, the rise of fascism in America, the divisiveness that we're struggling with. You know, how are we reconciling religion with behavior and culture, and where we're intersecting at all these crossroads? But what I found is that there is no person amongst us who hasn't loved and lost somebody and knows what that feels like. That's universal. And so I wanted to record this song because I felt that it was universal. And I also wanted to release it in terms of sharing it with other people and not just holding on so tight to it myself, but to share those tears and to share that humanity and to share that loss and to share that sense of grief, because I think we've all experienced it, certainly over the last year, last 18 months, and especially with the onset of COVID. And that was my inspiration for sharing it with Robert. And I put it in his hands with absolute trust that, you know, he would understand what I wanted. And I kind of gave him some outlines on what I wanted it to say. And he came back with what I felt was a hit. just a hit in terms of what I wanted to convey in this song.
And it's getting a wonderful, wonderful press. I've been reading some of the write-ups. It's being very well received. While and I'll give my own mini review, but perhaps in a different way than some of the other publications, which will also include for you, because you have some very insightful interviews there for people that want to get to know even more about you in ways we might not get to today. But I want to cover it from the standpoint of the emotion that it sparks. Everything that's said in your other write-ups are true. I mean, there's shades of, Herbie Hancock, R&B, great riffs and runs, excellently execution on the arrangement and the vocals. But for me, what I focused on was a couple things, and I will admit I often listen to the music and don't quite integrate the lyrics in the first listen, but on that first listen, I did, because there were compelling lyrics. It was immediately an interesting grab, until we meet again. And by the time I was done, I was in one of those unusual positions that it's a really hard place to get to, but you're crying sad tears and happy tears at the same time, and I think no, I really believe that's there's this. It's not a roller coaster ride, because it's actually interestingly not a ballad song, but a slow R&B, what I would call a groove song that has. So it's also interesting selection of a feel and a beat and a groove, laying down like something that might be evening date song between a boy and a girl or something, and turning it into this. I'm sorry, I'm sure that wasn't your intention, but turning it into this like really breathing of. The life never stops breathing throughout the song, even though you're talking about a very delicate subject, and the messages of loss and hope are just wrapped around each other and spiral around each other throughout the song, and that is what I found fascinating, compelling. And then the arrangements themselves, like you say, I mean, they're flawlessly executed. The vocals feel at times like you just have angels' wings coming down and caressing their feathers on your shoulders. And so I think, folks, whatever your walk is, you're going to find it extremely uplifting, but cathartic, and that you will find in just a 5 or 6 minute song the ability to experience this range of emotions that at the end of it ends up with a song of comfort and a song of hope. I know I droned on a little bit, but I wanted to share at least what that song had on the effect of one person, for you and for my audience, who I think I'm trying to motivate as much to go listen to this so they experience even half of what I experienced. You'll find it a positive, but I'm sure many of them will experience more.
Well, it was cathartic for me to finally into the world, because I had held on it and onto it, and I almost made the decision that I'm never going to record this song. It's just going to be something for me, and it did start to feel very cathartic to sing it and to sing through the tears, to embrace the grief of it, and I thought that other people could just relate to it. We're often so quick to, judge artists and when they're trying to express themselves, and whether that's Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion, who's received a great deal of criticism for their work, it is still their work. Lil Nas X has a different is also expressing himself and telling his experience. And I think we should never take that away from an artist. In this situation, I wanted to share this song because it was cathartic to me to finally share it. And my hope was that it would be something that would galvanize people as opposed to make it a polarizing statement. Whether you've lost someone to COVID or whether you're also still grieving the loss of George Floyd, that's still a loss. A family is going to grieve the gentleman that drove into the Capitol yesterday and was taken down, but a family is also going to grieve the police officer that was lost in that incident. And it's that universality of loss that I think really motivated me to put this song out, and to hopefully have other people have a response to it that's positive and share it with others. I didn't make this song for radio. I made this song for the story that it conveys. And that was, I think, the difference. It wasn't a motivation of, I'm going to get 1 million streams from this. I just wanted to tell an honest and true story and tell it in a very authentic and uncontrived way.
Well, authentic and uncontrived, I think are knowing you, and as we've gotten to be friends, it's clear that this is a song that truly poured from your heart, and authenticity as musicians is, one of the things that we really seek. It's like you said, it's someone with enough technical skill can copycat, but finding our own voice and expressing it is where we start delving into the changing and healing aspects of art.
And I think we all need that healing. I didn't mean to speak over you, but I think right now we're all so desperate to have a sense of healing, to have a sense of something that can bring us together as opposed to pulling us apart. And as I said at the beginning of this conversation, it is the universality of the words and of the story and of the message. And I think right now, more than anything, we all also need just a little bit of hope, just a little bit of hope, more hope than we have at the moment.
Yes. And let me ask you a little bit about the production process, just because, these yield insights too, because we know it took 10 years to get to the point where you're ready to do this song. When you reach production, how long did that take? And was it painful to get out, or was it just like, hey, now it's time, let's move ahead?
No, when Robert sent me back the track, the instrumental track, I flipped out. I was like, okay. It was as if I had sat down and written out exactly what I wanted everything to be. All I did was give him some pointers. I wanted this sound. I wanted that sound. I wanted, bass line a certain way. I don't want guitar on this. And we went back and forth because I have a really good friend who's a great guitarist, actually too. And I'm going to mention them because I love working with both of these guys. Linus Olsson, who lives in Nice, France, is just one of the finest guitarists on the planet. And Will Brahm, I have to say the exact same thing about. So we went back and forth, Robert and I, trying to decide, we didn't want to overdo it. We didn't want to put everything but the kitchen sink in there. So we made the idea to really make this a song that felt like it came out of the Black church, that came out of the experience of Blackness. I was very, very specific on that. And I wanted that feel for this song. I wanted to use that vernacular to express the words and the meaning and the story behind this song, because Derek Finch himself, was a brilliant pianist, was a brilliant organist. And so that was very important to keep that connection to this song. I wanted people to feel as if it was, the type of song that you would go to church and hear. And I hope that other artists will hear this song and want to perform it in their houses of worship, want to perform it amongst their friends, to share that message. So we, in the age of COVID, couldn't put a bunch of people in a studio anyway. So we pared it down. I did all of the background vocals. I arranged the background vocals. I had reached out to several of my amazing vocalist friends like Wendy Brene Smith and Melanie Taylor and Wilcie Chappell. And I mean, these are world-class singers, the best of the best of the best, in my opinion. Viva Vincent. And I wanted to bring all these vocalists together to do the background vocals, but I also didn't want to take the chance of putting anybody in danger. And we weren't at the vaccine mode. So I said, you know what? I apologize, everybody, but I'm going to do the background vocals myself. And when I sent it back out to them, the response and the support and the love for what I had been able to create under these very restrictive circumstances was just overwhelming. It was just overwhelming. So I felt like, wow, when you get this kind of response back from people who know the business, who know music, who have studied, who have traveled, who have toured, who are arrangers and composers themselves, and they're telling you, you've got something very unique and very precious on your hands, then I knew, go ahead and move forward.
So in the range of one end being emotionally distressing or emotionally intense every day in the studio on one end, and being, okay, I know the song, I know what I want to do, it's time to get down to business on the other end. Where were you in process once you got into the studio?
Once I was in the studio, it was just, I wanted to feel the joy of making this music. So the sadness that had accompanied this song for so many years really wasn't there. What I relied on was all the beautiful memories I got to make with Derek Finch. And that gave me a sense of inspiration. When I sent the track to his mother, and she wrote me back and she said, Sandra, I'm in tears. It's just so beautiful. And you just seem to know all the right ways to hit it. It was great. It was great.
Well, we are going to mention now that everyone should follow the links to find access to the song, but certainly at the end of the podcast, this is milestone number 2, certainly end of the podcast, we'll give you some time to point people to where you want them to go.
If you want to hear the single, you can go to www.sandrabooker.com. You can download it from there. All of the proceeds from the sale of this single is going to go to Jazz Musicians Against Cancer. And there's another organization that I also support called Peace Over Violence, and they work with survivors of sexual assault. And that's something that's very, very near and dear to my heart. I've always been a philanthropist in that way, and I will always be a philanthropist in that way, because I believe it is incumbent upon us, when we can use our art and use our talent to help others. That's an obligation that we should adhere to. Also, it's available on all streaming sites. If you go to my channel, Sandra Booker on YouTube, you can also see the video trailer. And I pulled those images from my family to make that video trailer. So it's very, very personal. And of course, I feature Derek in that video. And I'm asking people to listen and share it. I really want this song to go viral, only because of the message that's contained in it, and also because the revenues generated from it, I know, are going to go directly to helping people in a time in their life when they probably need it the most. I know what it feels like to need help and not get help when I need it the most. But I also know what it's like to feel like there was nobody to there for me, and people showed up for me, and it was to my great surprise. And it was so humbling when I felt there's no one to get me through some of the challenges I was having, to have people come and say, no, that's not true. I'm here and I'm going to get you through it. And you know what? I'm here and I've gotten through it. And I got to give a big shout out to the absolute best publicist in the world, in my opinion. And I know I'm right. The great Tom Esty has just been such a soldier and such an advocate for me, getting this record out, getting it to the press, talking about it, inviting people to listen to it, telling me, Sandra, I'm so proud to be working with you on this project. And I just have to thank him so much. And everybody who has reached out and supported me in this process and supported me at this time. Thank you so much. It's really been wonderful to find I've got so many friends around the world that love what I do, and we're willing to take a risk on me stepping away from the jazz genre to do something completely different. and not say, why don't you go back to jazz? But wow, I love what you're doing and keep doing it.
Yeah, and it's so important to credit all the people behind the music because there are always so many behind it. And with that, I hope you'll take a couple of questions that we have.
Absolutely.
Okay, the first question, your singing background, Sandra, is incredibly diverse. Do you have, excuse me here for a second, do you have a favorite style and what is it?
Let's see. Do I have a favorite style? Well, I'm a jazz chick, I'm a NOLA girl. So obviously I love jazz music, but I don't limit myself to just jazz music. I'm most known for it. But as my best girlfriend, Katanya Berger, will tell you, she's been waiting 20 years for me to put out an R&B soul gospel record. So ta-da, finally did it. And this is just the first single from the full album, which is called Songs from the Eighth Ward. And the Eighth Ward is where I grew up in the city of New Orleans. So not only is this a soul funk R&B record with a gospel jazz infusion to it, but it's also music about my hometown and what it was like to grow up in New Orleans and the different experiences I enjoyed and some of them that I, didn't enjoy so much. But it's still about being in this great, lively, exuberant, crazy, weird, bizarre, fascinating place.
And so we have more to look forward to.
More to look forward to, for sure.
Our next question is, the music industry and jazz environments are from, this is interesting, are from a business standpoint, more of a man's world. How do you navigate that? And does that have anything to do with you establishing your own independent record label?
It had everything to do with me establishing my own independent record label and my own publishing. The Booker Group is my label, and I've released all of my projects out on that label. And it's because I wanted to have creative control over my music. I wanted to own my music. I didn't want to have to find myself in situations where people like, even Anita Baker or Taylor Swift. I mean, these are international artists. And they've had battles with their record labels and being able to control their music or being able to retain the rights of their music once their contracts had ended. Unfortunately, Anita Baker, a prime example of that, or Prince, they've been through it. So I've not received some of the popularity that an artist on a Concord or a Blue Note might enjoy. But on the other hand, I get to make the music that I feel good about, as opposed to somebody telling me, well, we've given you in advance, you've got to record this, or you've got to record that, or even worse, having that discord and then finding my work being shelved. And, let's not just put it on men. Women can be quite the same way if in positions of power. It's how you use that power. And I think a lot of times, in this, especially in jazz, it can be very cliquish. And if people don't like you, it's not that you don't have the talent. It just may be something about you or your confidence that rubs them the wrong way. And people can very quickly become united in trying to bar you from, doing your art. I've tried to avoid that by being in control of the art that I get to create.
Interesting. And I've found there are cliques in all musical genres. So it's interesting that you would echo that. Okay, next question. You've called this new album, Songs from the Eighth Wards, a return to yourself. What did you mean by that and what prompted it?
It's a return to myself because it's a return to my childhood. It's a return to the music that I enjoyed listening to, but not necessarily performed as an artist. It was a chance to, go through my old R&B recordings and go through my old gospel recordings and, listen to people like Shirley Caesar and the Clark sisters, and listen to people like Curtis Mayfield and Donny Hathaway, and draw on some of that music and put it into one project that has that's thematic, that has that sound, that has that feeling. So that's really where that came from. It was returning to my musical roots and not just one aspect of music as a person growing up in New Orleans.
Okay. And I think our last question before we wrap up is, do you produce and publish other artists' music?
I have in the past. That's become less of a priority for me at this point. I'm currently working on a couple of projects. But I would like to expand, and I would like to expand the label, and I would like to be able to bring some other artists onto the label, and that's something that Robert Turner and I have been talking about. Seriousness, and again, the funds from Jazz Musicians Against Cancer and the sale of this project is going to allow me to facilitate that. So, I'm hoping that people will latch onto the record. You can buy other recordings that I've done, but I try to siphon a lot of that money into Jazz Musicians Against Cancer, because that allows me to create art, and it allows me to work with other artists, and get different music out there. For me, it's all about the music.
Well, Sandra, all I can say is I think you have a hit on your hands.
Thank
and regardless, everyone who listens to this, I think, is with an open mind, is opening themselves up to be touched by the healing power of music, which I believe in intensely as well as you. We thank you so much for your time. We thank you for sharing so much about not just the musical process, but about you and yourself, and giving of you and yourself in this time that we've had. I'll give you a little time to let our audience know whatever your links are, or wherever you'd like to take people through first. I think they've heard it before, but maybe some just jumped on now. I wish you'd repeat that and give us any of your final thoughts.
Well, actually, there is somebody that I want to take a moment to acknowledge. I was working with a big band. I started working with this big band in 2017. And I thought this band was so unique because as a big band, they didn't play like traditional four on the floor jazz tunes. It was so creative and so imaginative. And I really was honored to have the opportunity to share the stage with Tata Vega and Tony Malone and Ellis Hall. And that was made possible for me by a wonderful and extremely talented gentleman named Dennis Dreeth. So I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge how wonderful it was to share the stage with him. And 18-piece band's not working right now, but it really had an impact on me in a very positive way. And I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that. You should never forget when somebody's giving you a gift. And it was really a gift to be able to work with this band. And I mean, just a myriad of great players within that particular band, but he really gave me a platform on which to sing and perform. And also it gave me inspiration for saying, you know what, you can step away from jazz. That doesn't make you less of a jazzer. It just allows you to do something else. So Dennis Dreeth, thank you for that inspiration. For more information about the record, you can go to www.sandrabooker.com. You can find my channel on YouTube, Sandra Booker on YouTube. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Facebook. I live on Instagram. So please, send me a request to follow me on Instagram. And let me know if you like the song. Please leave me comments on my YouTube channel. I want to hear from you. I want to hear that your grandmother loves it, that your baby boy loves it, that your neighbors love it. I'm asking you, the listening public, to share it and make it a part of your life, and hopefully make it a message that is part of other people's lives, knowing that every time you share this record and every sale that we make from this record, I assure you it's going to go to help somebody else that you may never meet or never get to know. But I want that person to have the hope of meeting someone that they love again.
Well, thanks again, Sandra. And yes, everyone, please go to the links and the sources that Sandra just mentioned. Do whatever you can to access this single. And as just a little bit of self-promotion, if you like what we're doing here and want to hear more of it, please subscribe, like, and share the video. Especially, probably the best way you can help Sandra is by sharing it and really moving it out there, because I think she's had a remarkable story to tell, one of just survival and stick-to-itiveness and loss and hope that all deserve to hear. And with that,
Warren, thank you, and everybody at Viva Virtuoso for inviting me on this show. You guys have been so generous and so amazing and so supportive of this release. I cannot thank you enough. So really, from the bottom of my heart, thank you.
You are so welcome, and probably maybe for the first time I will mention that thanks needs to go equally in the spirit of recognition to my producer Nikki, who behind the scenes has been keeping the flow of these shows going and keeping me on track in ways that I can't begin to recognize her for. So hats off to Nikki as well.
Thank you,
And
Nikki.
with that, our show is a wrap, and we'll see you next week with an amazing, amazing musician that you're going to love.